Hello, everybody. Welcome to the February 21st instance of the Gateway API Gamma meeting. And that totally just stopped sharing the page I wanted to share. So
Modern technology, gotta love it.
gotta love it. All right. So yes, this is the February 21st instance of the Gateway API Gamma meeting. As a reminder, this meeting is governed by the Code of Conduct, so please treat each other with respect and be kind. This meeting also has an open agenda. Flynn was so kind to put that the link to the set agenda in the chat. So please feel free to open that up. And if you've got something you want to talk about, please add it to the agenda. Also, while you're there, add your name to the attendees list. This just helps us to keep a good record of who is interested in these kinds of things. All right, so to start off with, as is now our custom, we will discuss a recap of our previous meeting. So the first item on the recap is that the Gateway API, the meeting that occurs on Mondays, the March 6th meeting will be the first time where they're going to be trying out a 9 a.m. Pacific time slot to try to accommodate folks in different time zones. So if you are somebody who typically can't make the Gateway API meeting on Monday evenings, then this would be a good time to try to attend. We also talked about trying to schedule a Gateway API meetup sometime during KubeCon EU, maybe during Contributor Summit in the afternoon. If that's interesting to you, add a comment here in the agenda or in the SIG Gateway API channel within the Kubernetes Slack.
Yeah, on that, I'll just jump in real quick. I added a very informal poll on Gateway API Slack. There's a total of 6 responses right now. So if you're going to be at KubeCon and haven't had a chance to respond, it's really just the days of the week you think are most likely you'll be around and able to meet up. So far, the winners are Wednesday and Thursday, and the very clear loser is Friday, where almost nobody seems to want to be around then. So extra participation is very much appreciated. That goes back to a week ago today.
Wants to be around and able to be around are 2 different things, just for the record.
Fair point.
Great, thanks for that update, Rob. So then the next item on the recap is to make Gamma, it's an action item actually, to make Gamma more prominent on the Gateway API website. I don't remember if we had somebody assigned to that action item or not last meeting. Does anybody remember off the top of their head? Okay, I can tackle that. So I'll make a PR to
Sorry, I just had to scroll down to make sure it wasn't assigned to me. So
yeah, no worries. So I'll take this and make a note to go ahead and try to get this added to get this changed on the Gateway API website so folks actually know about us. It'd be great. All right. Last topic on the recap, we had a quick discussion about custom health checks for backends and adding that to Gateway API. The obvious conversation came up of, okay, is Kubernetes Health and Readiness Probe sufficient for most folks' use cases? Or is the lack of failover in the spec something that's really desirable behavior? Especially in the mesh context was one place that really came up. I'm not, I don't think there was any action as of yet, but it's certainly something that we are continuing to evaluate and maybe discuss at a later time. Any questions or comments on our recap?
actually, there was an action item on that for me to open a discussion on GitHub, and I cleverly did not do that. So I will make sure that that happens.
Okay. I'm remembering that now. Yes. Discussion. All right. We'll follow up on that in the next meeting then. All right. Any last questions or comments? All right, awesome. So moving into our main agenda now at this point, I'm very excited for this next topic. Flynn is going to share with us some Linkerd points of friction that they've had implementing Gateway API. I don't know if this is Gateway API in general or Gamma specific, but either way,
Gamma stuff in specific. You might be I don't know, you might be raising your expectations a little high to be very excited for this, but
Feedback is feedback, so I'm excited to hear the feedback.
Yeah. So for reference, Linkerd is trying to go through and do more with Gateway API in 2.13 than we did in 2.12. 2.12 is the point where that's the current Linkerd release right now. That's the point where we first started to use HTTP route a little bit. The main point of HTTP route in 2.12 was actually to give us a place to attach authentication policy in a couple of ways. Linkerd has long had a server resource, not a service resource, a server resource, which basically describes a set of pods and a port and gives you a place that you can associate some policy with that. That's a little bit finer grained than just talking about a service. HTTP route was a kind of a nice thing to attach the authentication policy to as well, because it started giving us a bit of an on-ramp into being able to use the Gateway API for other things. And because people wanted to do better things with an authentication policy than we could do with the server and server auth CRDs. Linkerd also has a bit of an ulterior motive here in that we have historically gotten away with having very, very few Linkerd specific CRDs, and we want to continue that trend. So to the extent that we can use Gateway API to talk about things within Linkerd, we can legitimately tell people that we still have very, very few Linkerd specific CRDs and blame the Gateway, allow the Gateway API to be used for interoperability. So we have run into a couple of points of friction as we've started going down this road, both in 2.12 and with upcoming work in 2.13. The specific thing we ran immediately into with 2.12 actually had mostly to do with conformance, because just in case you haven't run across this yet, Linkerd is in fact not an Ingress controller. It's a service mesh. And so trying to talk about being conformant with Gateway API, this actually predates the Gamma initiative entirely. That was clearly not going to happen. And so in fact, 2.12 copied HTTP route into the policy.linkerd.io API group solely so we could sidestep any questions about Gateway API conformance. It's a minor point of friction, but it was interesting to realize that the moment we started looking at this sideways, then we knew we were going to get questions about it, and we had to come up with a way of dealing with that. For 2.13, oh, and sorry, when I say copied, we copied it and then we deleted backend refs entirely, because HTTP routes in 2.12 are not about routing to workloads. They are about giving us a place to hang authentication policy. Now, 2.13, in 2.13, we want to actually use HTTP routes to talk about routing traffic. And so this means that the backend refs go back, and it also means that first conformance again starts to rear its ugly head a bit, and we have to figure out what to do with that. Some of y'all will have seen the Gateway API issue that got opened around the static mode of installation as opposed to dynamic mode installation. Linkerd will be happier in some ways with static installation, because that will allow people to go through and do more easily controlled configuration of everything. I personally don't think that this is a big deal in terms of friction anymore, after having gone through and verified that we can in fact use annotations on when we're using a Gateway API Ingress controller that goes through and dynamically creates everything, we can actually annotate the namespace in which it will create all of the deployments. And that gives us a way to control the configuration of those deployments with respect to the mesh. It feels a little bit ugly, kind of makes me, want to go and take a shower after I suggest to people that they should go and annotate somebody else's namespace in order to get this stuff to happen. But it's at least a functional thing that we can use to dodge this issue. Mike, I will link the static versus dynamic thing to the notes if nobody else beats me to it. But I'll give somebody else the opportunity to beat me to it anyway. The fundamental issue there, what we're talking about with static versus dynamic configuration, is that the Gateway API spec really wants to have the Gateway API Ingress controller's control plane create the data plane deployments. And that's challenging because when you're working with Linkerd, you need to annotate the data plane deployments so that they are brought into the mesh. So that's one sort of initial point of friction that we ran across. A second thing that we ran across gets back to that, a discussion that we've had a lot in Gamma recently and, over time, as we start talking about what exactly should the parent ref of an HTTP route in Gamma be allowed to be? And there has been lots and lots of discussion on that. And eventually what we settled on was, hey, for right now, let's go ahead and allow the parent ref to be a service, and that will at least give us a place to stand. Okay, so Linkerd in 2.13 has in fact stood on that place to stand. And oh, there's the link. Thank you, Shane. What we have found is that using service as a parent ref works okay at first and causes a lot of interesting problems when you start talking about consumer routing and not just provider routing. So this is also a thing that has come up in discussions in Gamma. I think it's pretty widely accepted that I think that everybody thought that binding to a service would be okay as long as you're talking about only provider stuff, and that binding to a service would be less okay when we start talking about consumer stuff. We have confirmed that it is in fact a large problem when you start talking about consumer stuff. One of the things that we know for certain that Linkerd users want to be able to do is to be able to not just do consumer policy overriding providers policy, and I'll pick on the perennial timeout example here as a specific example where you'd want to do this. It makes a lot of sense for a consumer to be able to say things like, well, the provider is willing to give me 5 seconds, but I want to constrain to 1 because that I need that extra agency for my client. Not only does Linkerd want to do that, but Linkerd also, we believe, needs to support the case where you have multiple consumer routes within the same namespace with conflicting policies, because this is a thing that we pretty much already allow with what you can do in Linkerd right now. We're not entirely sure that we know exactly what the right answer is there, but again, we can quantify as feedback that that is 100% going to cause problems for us. Yes, Kostin.
But it doesn't have to have the same solution. I mean, it is possible to have, for example, producer policies attached to the service, and for the client overrides to use a slightly different syntax or bind to something else. For example,
Yes.
it's very reasonable, and it's also a common use case that we discussed in the past about doing egress, having egress support.
Right.
And egress is a case of effectively of client overrides because you're talking with from the internet, and you are effectively in exactly the same situation where you set timeouts and you set whatever policies you want on egress gateway. So I think both the case of egress gateway and the case of client overrides is probably can be addressed in the same way and can be, it's important. We agreed that we want to address it, but we don't necessarily need to have one solution to fit all. I mean, to have exactly the same bindings, the same policies, the same capabilities on client and on server.
We do need an internally consistent solution there, even if it doesn't look exactly the same.
I agree.
So I'm bringing this up not in the sense of the world is going to come to an end tomorrow, more in the lines of, yeah, we need to talk about this and figure out something that can be consistent. Nick, you were going to say?
I was gonna say, with the way that you handle that at the moment, how does the client overrides target, if you have multiple conflicting client overrides in a namespace, how do you target like which bits in the namespace are doing that?
Right now, we tend to hang things on the Linkerd specific server definition, which
Right, okay.
allows it allows a bunch of things that are really nice. Like I said, we don't think it's an ideal solution. It's just a thing that we did in the past that permits a bunch of things that we can't do otherwise. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think I was going to say that I think so that I would classify that in terms of stuff we have talked about before as sort of under the umbrella of having some other like specific resource to hang service mesh routing objects off.
Right.
Yeah.
And
okay.
yeah, and we also find ourselves looking too at more advanced routing policies like traffic splits, for example, which we currently do with the SMI extension, and would be nice to not have to use the SMI extension for that. But also things like traffic shadowing, where, oh, there are several different workloads here, and we want this one to get a copy of all the traffic, which is different from traffic splitting and different from load balancing. So one of the things that we kind of have been thinking a little bit about is the idea of introducing a new sort of resource that can talk about the topology of routing, and see previous comments about how we really kind of like having a very small number of Linkerd specific CRDs. And it seems that that's a sort of thing that would be good to bring up in a larger group, because it might also turn out to be something that's useful more widely. That is a lot of stuff. We know, so there's been a long discussion on Slack about attaching policy to deployments and pods. And yeah, there are definitely cases where Linkerd would like to be able to attach policy to deployments, but being able to attach policy to a single pod really does not seem like something that, well, let's just say I haven't been able to come up with a use case where that would make sense to me. Deployments, on the other hand, being able to identify a workload and say, this workload has these policies attached to it, that could be an extremely powerful thing in the mesh.
Let's not forget network policy, because network policy has a workload selector. I mean, it's a model that is commonly used. I don't know if it's perfect or not, but it's reasonable.
Yeah, there's some stuff there where I need to look a little bit more into network policies in particular. But I want to emphasize again that as I talk about this stuff, I'm talking about places where we've found friction, which is not the same thing as saying places where we've necessarily found solutions. What we believe is going to happen in 2.13 is we will support binding to services. We will allow the backend ref to be a service as well. We will accept that the human user probably knows what they mean when they are using service in those two very different contexts, and we will allow Linkerd to figure it out. Linkerd has a bit of an advantage in resolving that ambiguity, because Linkerd is based already on the idea that the user will be thinking about routing to the service front end, and then Linkerd is expected to resolve it to an individual service backend. So for us, the ambiguity between the parent ref and the backend ref is minimized by what we already know the Linkerd user is likely to be thinking about. We do not expect that the backend ref will be limited to service for terribly long. We expect we're going to have to allow more than that. See previous conversations about routing topology and all that. One of the other things that's a little bit interesting is the question of whether we need to support multiple backend refs, or whether it would actually suffice to have a single backend ref that always points to something that talks about more advanced topologies if you want to do more advanced topologies. And That's another thing that we think would be kind of fun to bring up with the larger group and kick around a little bit. Finally, in 2.13, it's going to be the timing on some of this stuff is going to be a little bit interesting with respect to properly setting the status on HTTP routes. And so that'll be fun, but that is definitely a thing that we think is important and useful and will cause a lot of problems if we don't have it. We would also like it to be the case that for 2.14, we get to a place where we can be conformant in some respects with the Gateway API. And whether that's we have a conformance mode for static or it's, I don't know. It feels like there should be a way that by the time 2.14 comes around, that we can figure out a way to be conformant in some sense, because that will be something that people talk more and more loudly about as they use Linkerd. So yeah, that's the fire hose brain dump. If anybody has questions, happy to talk about what I can talk about.
I guess
go ahead.
I just had a small snarky comment to make. I guess that if only there was some sort
Nick,
of a profile
snarky?
if only there was some sort of profile that you could use to choose what sort of conformance you were addressing, and someone went off and built that.
Yeah, what an amazing that had never occurred to any of us here, Nick. Where did you come up with that brilliant idea?
I don't know, man. Must be something in the water here in Australia.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, I mean, it is a good point, and one of the questions is going to be if we can scrape loose some bandwidth for stuff like that. I'm sure it will shock nobody that we're a little constrained in terms of person power here. Kostin, were you gonna say something?
So, sorry, I missed that beginning. Where did you end up attaching a authentication policy?
Right now, Linkerd has a Linkerd specific CRD called server, not service, but server, which associates a set of pods and a port number and gives us more granularity than what we have otherwise.
And you attach policy to that one?
Yes. That's the pre-Linkerd 2.12 mechanism. In Linkerd 2.12, that is supported, but basically deprecated, and you can also associate authentication policy and such with HTTP route. As you probably heard me say, Linkerd would prefer not to have a lot of Linkerd specific CRDs. And this is one of the things that we've never been delighted by with server and authentication policy, and server auth is.
This is what I'm asking. I mean, if we can find, first of all, is to agree on the common CRD to represent the authentication policy. But the second step will be to figure out how to attach it. And we are, I think, in the same boat.
Yeah. I should probably also point out, since Nick is on the call, sorry, Nick, that one of the other things that Linkerd runs across a lot is, in fact, the 4-person startup scenario. And that, as you may have seen in the notes from the other one, starts raising a lot of questions about, okay, is policy attachment the right answer for some of these things? Because, yeah, that can get to be really complicated if you're coming into this as a beginner. Again, not something where I'm going to say we have a solution, just a place that we've all been looking at it and going like, wow, this is very, very powerful, but ooh, it'll be tough to explain to people first coming into this world.
Again, if only we had some sort of item on our agenda to discuss exactly that, like perhaps in 3 or 4 items time.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I had one. You said it was in 2.13. Is this implemented already, or is this planned?
It is implemented in some form that is not actually shippable at this particular moment, I think, is the best way to answer that.
Okay.
question.
The reason I asked is because I tried it out on the latest Edge release, I think it's called, and it was like, it looked like it was halfway done, so I was trying to play around with it. But
yeah. So Linkerd's release model for people who are not aware is that we do Edge releases. The intention is to do Edge releases weekly. Edge in this context is a bit of an unfortunate bit of terminology. This is edge in the sense of bleeding edge as opposed to stable, not in the sense of the edge of the cluster. So yeah, those of you who would like to try these things as they come off the presses, I would encourage you to try out the edge releases in Linkerd. We tweet about them and announce them in the Linkerd Slack and all that. And oh yeah, you should 100% expect a lot of stuff to be broken as the edges come out too. So, or at least not yet fully functional. Maybe that's a better way to put it. But you should also see it progressing very quickly. And John, specifically to your point, I am 100% certain that there's a bunch of code that is in the repo, but not in the latest Edge release. So.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked is like we said, there's no conformance test, but at the very least, we can do the human conformance test, right, and play around with it. So, feel free to ping me.
Yeah, we would appreciate that.
And I don't know if you've played around with the Istio one, but also would appreciate that as well.
If you can point me at the latest Istio, then yeah,
I'll send you a message.
I mean, don't get me wrong, the laptop was bought by Buoyant, and so it's possible it'll just melt as soon as I type Istio at it, but I think it'll be okay. Anything else? Going once, going twice. Okay, so yeah, there we go. There's the Linkerd feedback so far, and we will happily bring back more of this as we have it.
Thank you, Flynn. Yeah,
Sure.
it's all this is very my expectations were satisfied. Like
Wow.
Hearing that Linkerd is hoping to be conformant with Gateway API in 2.14 is amazing. It sounds like a lot of the feedback is under the theme that we've kind of all been feeling, that HTTP route binding the service works enough for the base use cases, but losing consumer routing and overrides is something that a lot of users potentially in Linkerd's case definitely are going to want to do. So
John, I am specifically enjoined from saying anything about time and 2.14.
Fair enough.
So sometime in the future.
Sometime in the nebulous future. Great. Good enough for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it might be between one of these agenda, the policy attachment update agenda item, and a couple of that's in further down the agenda, and this feedback. I think we've got some work to do as far as taking another crack at HTTP route binding for mesh and seeing what else we could potentially do after 0.7.0, of course. Once you get everything else out the door.
Right.
All right, moving on to the agenda. Shane, you're up. About reminders.
Yep.
I'm just hearing. Oh,
if
okay.
I cut out and go robot. Okay, if it gets really bad, just wave your hands and tell me to stop. But just in case, because I didn't necessarily understand the sarcasm, but just in case it's helpful to anybody who wasn't really catching on, there is a conformance profiles project underway. And if you're interested in checking it out, subscribe to the link that I put in chat. And if you're interested in helping out, feel free to say so. So one reminder that I just wanted to throw out, this is a general Kubernetes reminder. Recently, k8.gcri.io, it's going to be deprecated, and we're replacing it with registry.k8s.io. So please do, if you have that anywhere in your CI, things like, core DNS are in there, anything you might be using in your CNI and your projects everywhere, please switch them over to the new registry. It is equivalent. But the old one is being deprecated, and it is expensive. So just a general call out.
There's actually there is a huge issue open with all the projects that people would like to get updated on that one for anybody who's maintaining other projects.
Are you referring to Bob's?
I am referring to the one, there we go. Kates.io/issues/4780. Yes, from Mr. Bobby Tables.
Okay. Yeah, I just to throw this out there in case it's unclear. We're all also change it in your downstreams, but yes, that issue is like keeping track of everything upstream.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Shane. This is a big one. A lot of my partner teams are talking about it internally. There's because so Shane, could you remind everybody of kind of what the effects are in the near future? Isn't GCR being shut down soon?
In the near future, it's being frozen, so like you won't be able to get changes out of it. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly when it's actually being shut down, but it won't be very long.
Yeah, so you use that the threat of resources going away to convince your people to make the migration. Outages help get people committed to projects. So I want to throw that in there. Outage driven development, coin it.
Yeah, it would be so nice to have potential outages driving your development, not real outages.
Good, fair enough. Good. Thanks for the clarification. Accurate. All right, moving right along here. Sanjeev, you've got an item on multi-cluster service networking model and framework.
Yes. So I've spoken to a couple of you on this in the past in December, and let me put some slides out to help provide some context.
Sure, I will retire the screen share.
I don't have sharing permission yet.
I'm not seeing the option.
Oh, did I not sign up with the same email as my mailing list email or whatever?
Well, I think Rob.
You're just trying to give them sharing.
Yeah, often I've just made co-host.
Make
I don't
him a-
know if there's a better way.
Okay, I can make co-host. I'll do that.
Yeah, just make him co-host. I know Sanjeev. I can vouch for Sanjeev. He's not gonna like get up there and put
Make sure you use your powers for good,
What's that?
Sanjeev.
Okay.
that guy from the 80s.
Try now.
Max Headroom on there or anything.
Oh, good.
Okay. You all see this?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. So it's a slightly broadish topic, but hopefully we'll all kind of agree on this. The scope of this is pretty broad, and how do we break it down from top down onwards? So what we're dealing with here is multi-cluster service networking as opposed to cluster management. And obviously there's related work going on in various groups, including SIG multi-cluster with things like the MCS API, Gateway API, of course, this team right here. Again, to varying degrees of priority of multi-cluster related pieces. In some of these projects, there's been work going on early. In Gamma, maybe not so much just yet, but I would contend that it's good to get it going and in a way that's, I think this will straddle different working groups. So hopefully I have provide some context here and help us collectively put things together. One of the proposals, jumping right down to the bottom bullet here to start with, is that the community, K8s community in general, overall, should assemble and document a K8s native multi-cluster service networking set of solutions and APIs, starting with defining an overall model and then building out each subcategory within it. I know there's quite a bit of work that has already been done, but I feel like a little bit of a revisit is helpful because there's a lot of piecemeal work that has happened. So what do I mean by these subcategories and overall model?
Actually,
I feel
Rob, you have your hand up. Was there something you wanted to jump in with right at the beginning here?
Yeah, I'm wondering, is this something that you've already shared publicly? Is it possible to link these slides in the agenda?
Yes, I will add it to the agenda. The only thing I've done publicly is this morning, I briefly started to talk about this in the SIG multi-cluster. So yeah, I can. Make it
Okay.
up.
Great. And then the other thing, just it looks like this is a great presentation, but may need to time box it a little bit because there are a couple items after this as well.
Yeah.
I could go 10 minutes and if, or something, whatever you feel appropriate, and then we could wrap up the other items and come back to this or however.
One thing, so again, thanks for the work here, Sanjeev. One thing that I found to be helpful with slide decks is to potentially give folks time to review and provide feedback and discuss in like a follow-up.
Yes.
So if you could maybe spend, anywhere in that 5 to 10 minute range, giving us the overview and then share the doc and the agenda as Rob mentioned. I'm very interested to be able to dig in on my own time and add feedback here and discuss in the next Gamma meeting where you're able to attend.
Yeah, that's the goal here, to kind of just flash some key points, make it public, and then have follow-up for more detailed work.
Fantastic, thanks.
Okay, so I'll just take 5 to 10 minutes today, just to kind of touch on a couple of key points. So first thing is about the overall model, right? So to me, that constitutes defining the reference topology. And there could be one or more reference topologies, but we should agree on what those are. So as an example, there are all these terms that are used across these projects, like a network or a gateway or a cluster set, a mesh, and eventually even a multi-mesh. And A, it's not always clear, and B, it's not always consistent across these projects as to how these objects are defined and relate to each other. So one particular model could be, as shown here, which is that a cluster set as defined in the MCS API is effectively equivalent to a mesh as defined in any of the service mesh projects, as well as what Gamma would be calling a mesh. That need not be the only thing, but we should agree if that is the case, and we should precisely define it in the case of the reference topology. That in turn could have multiple quote-unquote networks, where a network is a contiguously routed space without any NATing needed for any endpoint within the network to talk to any other endpoint. So a single clusters pod networking space is a network, or a bunch of clusters in the same VPC could be a network, as long as they can talk to each other without NATing. So some of these multi-cluster features like policy, they do depend on that, right? If you want to have a policy at the multi-cluster set level, but if you are allowing for multiple networks to be within a multi-cluster set, then you have IP duplication and you can't do certain kinds of policies. And I've tried to initiate proposals in the past for things like multi-cluster network policy, and there was always ambiguity on, well, what is the exact model are we designing towards, and then how does that change with gateway and all these things. So it comes back again and again that we need to have a kind of a consistent reference topology across a number of these projects, and then build out the subcategories. And then definitely, there are implications of namespace sameness within a cluster set, but clearly no namespace sameness across clusters, across cluster sets or meshes. And it is expected that an enterprise would have this. This could be one kind of generic topology that we would need to design all these projects around, but it's not clearly stated. So we would need to agree and see whether this is the case. But there are a few other topology options which have come up while we've discussed things like multi-cluster policy, for example. One thing that came up was, no, We do not want multiple networks within a cluster set. In fact, a mesh/cluster set should have a single contiguous network. And if you cannot have a contiguous network, then you must have another mesh. That simplifies policy and load balancing because it's all one continuous IP routing domain. The endpoints can be uniquely identified and scattered anywhere. But that's not generic enough and may not be realistic enough given real world topology requirements of private networks and separate domains. And also when you look at things like the Istio project have got all these deployment models, single network, multi-network. If we are trying to commonize that through a gamma multi-cluster reference topology, that may not be enough. So the core point here is that there are a few things that we can go into as to defining what is the precise reference topology that we want to target consistently across all these projects, and consistently define all these terms and the relations to each other so that we can then map policies, load balancing, service discovery into that. Okay, so you can see it's kind of a top-down approach, but I think there's a lot of stuff here. So okay, so I just let me just take 2 more minutes here because I think I'll run out of time. So I just mentioned just one thing here. Obviously, there's more details about reference topology. I've got these slides are fairly busy, but I'll just give you just 1 or 2 examples. Like, is the MCS API adequate? Does it, do we need to make multi-cluster services more first class, like the way Istio does automatic service discovery across all clusters, or do we need more of an explicit opt-in model like the MCS API? Going back to that multi-network versus single network decisions, right? There's been ambiguity in all these projects on whether they actually work in multi-network or they implicitly assume single network. So we need to kind of agree on that. I have a certain perspective, but I'm sure we all have our own perspectives, and we should, agree on that and define these terms unambiguously. I got some more, things we can go into potential topologies, but I'll skip that for now. 2 quick notes, 1 on load balancing and 1 on policy for now. But obviously there's been work done in Gateway on multi-cluster, ingress kinds of things where maybe you can sort of have a service import as a backend ref. But it's not properly formally defined in the Gateway API docs as such. And I feel like even that could be, more work could be done there. There are actually multiple kinds of even multi-cluster ingress models, that we would need to sort of confirm and cover. And I'm just rushing through this, sorry. So I know, Rob, a couple of people have their hands raised, so I'll just finish up here. Similarly with policy, so I'm just talking about network policy here, but really I look at it really as any policy related to networking. So for example, there is both network policy and auth policy, right? And I see potential for convergence on the L4 policy for auth with net policy. The net takeaway here is that okay, let me just jump to the takeaway slide here, next steps, right? So what I was hoping is that we can decide on a working model for developing this work out further across Gamma, Gateway API, SIG network, SIG multi-cluster. How do we do this? Do we want to have some other dedicated calls with people that are interested and some community docs and GitHub discussions? Potentially even a subgroup on multi-cluster service networking. If we wanted to break this up into KEPs and JEPs, it would feel like maybe one gap on the overall model, which describes the reference topology models and covers these kinds of topics, and then separate follow-up gaps on service discovery, policy, load balancing in the context of that overall model. and whether this group is the potential home for this work, or in collaboration with Gateway API, SIG multi-cluster, and so on. So anyway, that's kind of a quick rush through. There was a bunch of things here. Go ahead, and if you
Yeah,
have
thank
anything-
you. I know we're running out of time here, so I'll be real quick. I raised my hand when you were talking about the lack of documentation right now on how Gateway API interacts with MCS. That's something like I've had on my personal to-do list for a while. I'm going to create an issue to track that formally in OSS and assign it to myself. I do want to get that out in the next couple of weeks because I agree that that's a huge gaping hole that's relatively easy to fill. I would say this presentation as a whole seems very broad in scope, which is great, but I think it will probably have to, I think as you're suggesting, tackle this in small little chunks as we can, with starting with the most well-known or easiest to define areas first before we go too far down. Some of these things just, I don't think we've had enough time to think through. But I definitely think between this group and the Gateway API group and the SIG multi-cluster group you already talked to, I mean, it's the right group of people. We probably need to, at some point, try and get all of them together in one place and talk about it, but that's really hard with time zones, so we'll see what we can do. But at a minimum, thank you for starting this discussion, getting this presentation out. It's great. And thank you.
Sure.
Thanks.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I'll make this public. Any other quick thoughts?
That's the big one from my perspective. Having this be public so that we can go and review it in more detail, I think is going to be a very important part of
Right. I did
getting
not.
some reasonable stuff on this.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I didn't know whether to put too much detail or too little detail. So in some topics there's some detail, but there's obviously a lot more. This is a broad scope, but the one key point here is that there's been lots of piecemeal efforts, and I think I would propose and welcome your thoughts that we need to kind of more formally define a reference model that works across all these projects, and then fill in the gaps. Some of these projects already have solutions, and in some cases they just need documentation, but in some cases there's additional work needed. And then so yeah, we'll have to kind of evolve this across the projects, and I'm happy to kind of contribute to working with you all to make this happen. Mike.
Yes, I definitely see the need for more like cohesive cross-SIG collaboration on understanding like how do we want to model the subject area. So yeah, I'm excited about this. Thanks for bringing this to this group. And yeah, I think just the one other thing I would note is adding the multi-network working group that meets on Wednesday mornings, I believe, Wednesday morning EST, as another stakeholder, particularly for the like network level.
So that's another slightly unfortunate overloading of terminology. The term multi-network as used in that group, I believe, is not quite the multi-network referred to here and in projects like STO. So without belaboring that point, that this is in this current form, this is not quite what that multi-network group is doing, but let's just
it'll be good to disambiguate, even if it's just to say like this is not that.
Yes,
and get agreement from both sides. Yeah, cool. Thanks.
I'm skipping over. I mean, I've done work in the past about multi-cluster network policy and ran into some of these issues about differences in the interpretation of the model. So I have some context here, working both on policy as well as on the MCS API and things like that. Okay, thank you.
Yep, thanks. Again, yeah, really appreciate the effort put into that presentation. Looking forward to getting a hold of the doc and adding comments. We do have one last topic on the agenda here. We had some shuffling of items, but you're at the last item on our agenda, and it's an update on the policy detachment discussion. So a couple of weeks ago, in I think 3 weeks ago, actually, in a GAMA meeting, and then subsequently in the next Gateway API meeting, we had discussion about policy attachments, and you know, I shared some of the feedback that we had in this group to Gateway API. It was like, you know, it's a bit, feels heavy and complex. So it's concerned about security proliferation. And we had a what I thought was a very fruitful conversation in GitHub discussions. I linked the GitHub discussion in the agenda notes to try to summarize the current path forward here. From my understanding, is that we're going to take a stab at the timeout question, because that was one of the more prevalent you know, examples of things that felt honestly a bit silly to have users configure with the full policy attachment hierarchy, or at least heavy to use another term there. Had some good examples here, some prior art. Nick had a fantastic kind of breakdown of different, you know, what are the options, where should we put these things, and there's some good comments here about kind of using, you know, potentially having a field on HTTP route that was vague enough to not lean itself to in a particular implementation, but not too vague to where it's not useful, as Billy jumped in and clarified here. So I think the open question in my head, based on this thread, and what Rob, you and Nick are here to kind of weigh in on this, is kind of where does this conversation happen? We do have an upstream GEP PR that Nick started on timeout specifically. It's great. I started reading through it, and I plan to leave some comments here. Oh, it's not linked to me.
No, it's not that one. Yep, sorry.
No, you're good. So
you open the deploy preview, not the
Yep, I was just about to say it's not. I read through the deploy preview and quickly stopped because of diagrams. The diagrams are much prettier when you're into the preview. So you can see Nick's hard work to parse all this out. Don't know if you want to hop in here, Nick, and provide kind of a quick overview.
Yeah. So what I wanted to do here is that Envoy timeouts diagram is roughly what I had to do when I was first working with Envoy timeouts to understand all of the different options available. And it's one of the reasons, the fact that I drew a diagram like that was one of the reasons. And then I looked at the timeouts for other ones and I'm like, well, those are all different. It's one of the reasons that I was like, for timeouts too hard. So the idea here is to make it so that you've got a similar diagram that you can look to see what the timeouts cover. And so that we can look a bit more to find the common bits and talk about well, if we're going to do a request timeout, what does that mean, and how would data planes implement that? So the next stage for me to update this is to update this with some of the suggestions that Arco made in that issue that you already popped open. I think those are all excellent suggestions. So I think it seems to me that the most likely candidates are something like a request timeout, and something like some sort of idle timeout. Exactly where that idle timeout stops and starts is tricky. And so I think that the points that were made in the discussion about, hey, have things, this is, maybe if we're a little bit vague, it's okay, is probably correct. The part of me who has been writing specs for Gateway API for multiple years now screams in terror at the thought of having a vague spec at all. So like, I think if we are going to be vague, we need to be vague in a clearly scoped way. We need to talk at least about what the sorts of vagueness that we'll permit and what it means and so that's why I wanted to sort of draw these diagrams first. Flynn.
The other option would be instead of or possibly in addition to, being simply vague, we could be opinionated and say, if you are going to be a properly behaving Gateway API implementation, you should support timeouts that do this.
Yep.
And recognize that not everybody's going to do that out the gate, but that actually, as I've been thinking about some of this, I wonder if that could end up being a more productive tack than some of these.
Yeah, and I think. Sorry, yeah.
Somebody else talking?
Yeah, someone else go first.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say the opinionated bit worries me a bit. No pun intended. Like that. Yes, that's kind of the role perspective. It's probably a more attainable situation, but I guess, and this hasn't proven itself in this group, which I'm thankful for. But what I don't want to see is, oh, hey, there are like 7 Envoy implementations, and we all think that Envoy has the correct semantics, so we're going to be opinionated about Envoy. Thank you for that time emoji. That's perfect. We are right at time. Nick, I want to give you a chance to finish.
Yeah. So that exact thing is why I had the summary of who uses what data plane, the summary table there. I agree. I think that it's reasonable for us to lean towards having some sort of like opinion about what the things should be, and that's where we can get away with having vagueness, because we say a request timeout means this. One of the reasons I wanted to do this sort of review is that that way we can make sure that our opinions are at least not completely impossible for all of the major data planes that we have in place at the moment. And that's what I'm aiming for here is that, ideally whatever timeouts we do should be, not only not totally impossible, but reasonably straightforward to implement in each of the data planes. You shouldn't need to sort of randomly add together 2 timeouts and then arbitrarily bucket the timeout setting you're given into some like proportion or something like that. Like it should fit pretty cleanly into a timeout in each of the data planes. And that's why I think that request timeout is reasonably likely, and also some form of idle timeout is also reasonably likely, because everybody supports something like that. So yeah, that's the point here is, I'll be honest, I got tired of no one really believing me that when I said it was really hard.
Hey,
so
I
I'm
believe
like, look,
you.
I'm going to show you it's really hard by making a whole bunch of diagrams that give you a migraine when you look at them.
I believe you that it's really hard, Nick. I also believe that there needs to
it's
be
not insolvable. I agree.
Yeah. There needs to be a way that we can explain to new users how this stuff works and not explode their heads immediately, which, like I said, I totally believe you that it's hard. I was actually going to ask, can one of y'all link to the diagram specifically? Because as I was clicking around on the GEP, I did not get to that diagram, which
there's a deploy preview. The diagrams are actually done in the Markdown using Mermaid JS.
Thank you, Rob.
So I thought it was better than trying to put PNGs in there that couldn't update. I've actually updated our MacDocs install so that it supports Mermaid things. Yeah. Oh, it does. It works in GitHub UI. If you switch the Markdown into preview mode, right, as opposed to raw, GitHub supports Mermaid as well. So
nice.
All right, I'm gonna hop in here and try to wrap this up. Just respect everybody's time. We're right at 3 minutes over. But yeah, I'm excited to. I think there's a little bit more to talk about as far as policy attachment goes, because I think there's room to go down as well as across. Not clear what that means. Hopefully next time. But for now, again, thank you everybody who's attending, including some of our newer attendees. Next time you're in, we'll have you do some introductions. But for now, I'll call this meeting done, adjourned. Thanks everybody. Take care.
See you next time. Thanks.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.